If you like sex a lot, does that mean you are addicted to sex? And what is sex addiction? Welcome to Passion Unlimited podcast. I am your host, psychotherapist, author, and founder of Fearless Love, Jianny Adamo. We are in season 4 of Passion Unlimited podcast, and I am focused on from love trauma to fearless love, which I am discussing the topics in my Amazon bestseller, and I am providing you with the tips and strategies to survive, to recover, and life, love, and relationships. In today's episode, I am focusing on the signs of sex addiction. Can you be in love with a sex addict? And how can one recover? And what does it take to have a healthy, loving relationship that includes sexual intimacy? Well, welcome. And I want to thank everyone who has been purchasing the book From Love Trauma to Fearless Love. And I also want to thank you guys for leaving me some awesome reviews. I also am really excited about the great reviews I have been receiving from the professional magazines and review organizations of audiobooks and my soft cover. So thank you so much. And for those of you who are reading the book or who are listening to the audiobook, please leave me your review on Amazon. That would be fantastic. So I am going to continue with the Q&A segment the way I've been focusing in season 4. And I'll be answering your questions on this topic. So the first question that I want to answer is, what does it mean to be a sex addict? The person who wrote this said, I like sex a lot. Does that mean that I am addicted to it? And the funny thing is that I've had many women, especially, and even in my family, call me up and they're like, I think my husband is a sex addict. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, why do you think that? Like, what's going on? And well, he likes to have sex all the time. And like he could have sex every day if I wanted to. So I'm like, well, is he having sex only with you? Or is he having sex with other people? What is going on there? Oh no, it's only with me. Everything is, about making love to me. So I'm like, I start laughing because just because your partner would love to have sex with you every single day or every evening, that does not make someone a sex addict. So sex addiction, what is sex addiction? Sex addiction is actually, there are several terms that can cover this, and it's sex addiction, sexual dependency, and hypersexuality, excuse me. So all of these three are kind of interchangeable. And that's basically when someone has their life dominated with the need to have an intensity-based experience, usually surrounding sex, the thought of sex, or planning their conquest or encounters. The addict has a secret dark life that basically becomes more important than all other aspects of his or her life. So they usually forego maintaining regular eating habits, prioritizing their exercise, maintaining a strong work ethic, or fostering healthy relationships. Okay, so usually most addicts do not have healthy relationships. About a year ago, I had a client who found me. He did a lot of research before he called me, and he had been in therapy before. He's actually out of state, so like he really did a ton of research, and he chose me because I have done the work of actually writing my book on recovering after being involved with a sex addict or a narcissist, and that I also am an expert in helping couples overcome and recover and repair trust after infidelity. So he liked my background. He understood that I really understood a lot of what he was dealing with, which was a very unique call because usually I get the calls not from the addicts themselves. I get the call from the partners of the addict or the partners of the narcissist. So in this case, this client did not have a diagnosis of sex addiction. He called me because he had been having an affair for 3 years. He was married, or he's married. He was with his partner about 20 years, married 10 of those years. And for the last 3 years, there was an affair going on that he felt very much in love with his affair partner. In the meantime, he was also having the GPS hookups, and he was watching pornography, and he had these chat room sex and cyber sex things going on. When I did his history, his relationship history, then, all these other things are coming out, the one night stands, the obsessive online dating, the multiple sexual partners, compulsive masturbation. Anyways, there was a whole slew of things which all kind of are indications of a sex addiction. Anyways, so he didn't consider himself a sex addict. And so I did not obviously give him a diagnosis. I just said to him, I want you to start researching this term, sex addiction, and I want you to start, to looking at this and see if you think that maybe this fits for you. I also gave him resources to start reading and getting himself educated. And I figured between the therapy and his research and education, hopefully he himself can come to the conclusion that he was probably dealing with an addictive behavior. All right. And so basically it took that client, we'll call him John. It took John about 6 months in therapy. He's continued long-term with me, but within the 6 months, he finally understood that he was battling an addiction. He did break off the extramarital relationship. He started to repair his relationship with his partner, and his life started to turn. He finally started to feel more peace in his life instead of all the stress and anxiety and tension that he carried when you're living a double life. Because unfortunately, sex addicts live a double life. And this is where it gets a little complicated, because a lot of these sex addicts do have high narcissistic traits, and a heck of a whole lot of them are individuals with a personality disorder. So just to kind of clarify, a person who is a narcissist is also an addict, but not all addicts are narcissists. In this case, John, we determined had a sex addiction, making him a sex addict with very high narcissistic traits. However, he had guilt and remorse, and his desire to grow out of this allowed him to grow and evolve out of it with the help that I gave him. Usually a person with the personality disorder doesn't have enough insight to recognize that his lifestyle is out of control and that he's dealing with an addiction and that he needs help. Usually they are in complete denial, and they keep manipulating and controlling other people to keep gaining the rewards that they seek in life. All right. So also with sexual addiction, just like any addiction, there is an escalation of engagement and risky behaviors, regardless of the increasingly disastrous consequences. Okay. So you will see that the addictive behavior might have started very, easily just watching a ton of porn, and then becoming interested in maybe prostitution, and then maybe it escalated into becoming a little bit of voyeurism and watching people in your neighborhood, whatever, or online, because right now everything obviously it's virtual. So one thing just kind of escalates to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Okay. All right. So, and of course, part of the problem with having an addiction is that an addict lives in deep denial. So they really don't understand or accept that their life is out of control. There's a lot of rationalization. There's a lot of justification for their behavior. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next question. The next question is, I think my significant other is addicted to sex. How do I know for sure? Okay, so here I'm gonna give you some things to look at and consider with your partner, consider around your partner, and then you can decide, whether this is kind of like hitting the mark. Because if so, then you're probably are dealing with your work, you're in love with someone, or you're in a relationship with someone who may be, having problems with a sex addiction. Okay, so the first thing I want you to recognize is, if you're dealing with a sex addict, you're probably noticing patterns where their words and their behaviors don't match. Usually, when you're dealing with the addict, whether it's sex addiction or alcohol or drugs or gambling or whatever it may be, there's a lack of substance and character. These individuals will very easily be able to lie to you straight to your face. So they're chronic liars and they're highly manipulative. And so when you start, you will be noticing, or you have noticed, that there's a lot of inconsistency with their stories and what the facts truly are. Okay, so that's your first sign. A lot of inconsistencies with their words and their behaviors, their stories, and the facts. Another sign that you would probably notice would be that maybe in the beginning of the relationship, it was extremely romantic, passionate, or sexual. Here, usually there's like a lot of love bombing when you're involved with a sex and love addict. And what happens is, when it's so fast, so furious, is there's not a lot of time to reflect on and really getting to know each other without getting the chemistry involved. And so there are clients who, there are sex addicts who aren't necessarily the fast and furious kind, and they will take their time to get to know you and study you in order to provide you with what you're looking for and mirroring that back to you. And I remember I had a client who was, she had been seeking advice from a financial advisor in order to go through her first divorce. And then she didn't hire him, but he basically started to pursue her and woo her into a relationship. She was still married. She was just considering a divorce at the time. At the end of the story, basically, she divorced her husband, got pregnant by this gentleman, ended up marrying this second guy. And in about their fourth year of their marriage, she discovered that he had never stopped wooing and chasing other women. He had been still in and out of a relationship with his ex-girlfriend the entire time they were married. So bottom line is, she ended up having to go through a second divorce from this gentleman, because he ended up pursuing her while she was still married and wooing her into a relationship where she thought she had now found a person who really understood her and cared about her and loved her. So you will also discover that a lot of these individuals will target men and women who are vulnerable, people who are exiting their marriages or quite vulnerable. So a narcissist, a sex addict, people who cannot do healthy relationships love that. They're seeking out the vulnerable, because you will be easily, wooed and blinded into falling in love with someone who cannot provide you with a healthy relationship. Okay. Another sign. So once you're involved with the sex addict, sex tends to become the addict's most important need, and they're usually not practicing safe sex, and they tend to brag a lot of times on how much sex they can have. And it's incredible how much sex they can have, because the rest of us are like, well, how do they get any work done? Seriously, that's what I always ask myself. How do they even get any work done? Because they tend to be able to have sex multiple times a day without a problem. However, sex with a sex addict is not about loving you or caring to your needs. They're pretty selfish, and it's really about them. Another sign that you can be looking for is an addict tends to lose track of time. So because they're pursuing and engaging in pleasure, and that is their priority, you're going to see lapses in time where if you're dating, they will forget about the date. They will tell you that they were sleeping, and they slept through, and now they woke up and it's like, the next morning, and I'm sorry, I didn't get there to pick you up and we didn't get anywhere on our date. Or you may be out with the sex addict and realize that, it's 11 o'clock, you want to be home, you want to go to bed because you got to go work the next day, and they're not done having pleasure and whatever it is that they're doing, and they cannot bring you back on a reasonable time. So they don't really manage their time very well. And it's one extreme or the other with them as well. When you confront them, when you tell them, give them negative feedback about because you need them to be behaving in a certain way, they're very defensive. They're going to be accusing you of things also that you are not doing. Yeah, they are doing. That's called projection. So one of those areas that they love to project is the jealousy thing. Because they're always cheating and they're non-monogamous, they're going to project that onto you. So they're always going to suspect that you're the one who's cheating and needing a ton of attention from the opposite sex, which probably is not true, but they certainly need a ton of attention. You're probably going to see the use of guilt, charm, hope, love, obligation, fear, and confusion to get what they want. You're basically, if you really sit down and analyze your relationship, if you are involved with a sex addict as well as maybe a narcissist, these are traits of these individuals. Your life is now governed by guilt, by charm, by hope, by love, by obligation, by fear, and confusion. These relationships are very intense relationships, and they're very driven like a roller coaster ride. So emotionally, you're going to be up and down continuously with this type of individual in your life. There is very little neutral and peaceful times. Those are only glimpses that you get in the relationship to be in that place of peace with them. And usually it surrounds having fun or having sex. Those are your places of neutral and having peace with them. And if you're not having fun or having sex with them, usually you are in one of these other places of confusion and fear and anger and frustration and just feeling perhaps even guilty that you've done something wrong, that you've pushed them away. You're also probably going to recognize too that there's a lot of signs of nagging, pursuing, and complaining when it comes to them getting their needs met. Yeah, when you're asking for your needs to be met, there's just complete indifference and callousness. Okay, so there's these things where for them, their needs and their wants and their desires are super important for you to be responding to. But when it comes for them to respond and be responsive to your needs, that doesn't happen. Okay, and then there's also patterns that you're going to identify where your reality is just not being validated. Your reality is continuously being denied. And what this means is that the addict will probably do something and then deny it, and then tells you that you're going crazy or that you're emotional or controlling. And here I had a client many years ago, a couple. The husband was actually a surgeon, and he was again having an affair. He was having affairs, long-term affairs, and he was gaslighting his wife. And he would come home from the hospital and leave behind like the nurses' uniforms in their living room. He would bring and like leave behind in the kitchen a second plate with crumbs, as if there were two people eating that night when she was sleeping. So basically she would wake up the next morning and find, nurses' uniforms and 2 plates with crumbs and other things that he would be leaving behind to basically drive her crazy and make her believe that he was bringing in to their home his affair partner, just to escalate the trauma that this woman was having with him. So this is called gaslighting, and this is not uncommon when you're dealing with an addict, a sex addict, and a narcissist or a sociopath. These are classic things that they do to just push you into that place of completely feeling like you're gone nuts and no longer trusting your sense of self and your intuition. Okay. The ninth and final sign that I would want to give you, that you would want to know, that is important to figure out if you're dealing with a sex addict or a narcissist, is that your gut is telling you that there is something wrong. And it's been telling you this over and over again, but yet your logic comes in and gives you parts and pieces of the things that you see that are good quality of the person that you're with, and that subsides your fears. So there's this constant feeling or sensing that there's something wrong in your relationship, that there's something wrong with your partner, but you can't put your finger on it. So these are some of the tall tale signs that you would want to listen to and maybe take action in dealing with this situation in your relationship. So the next question I want to address is, how does one recover from sex addiction so that they can have a healthy, loving partnership that includes sexual intimacy? So the first thing is, yes, people with sex addictions can heal. People with any kind of addiction can heal. That's the great news. So a person who is suffering from an addiction is someone who is not only escaping his or herself, but is also adverse to having an intimate relationship. The addict fears intimacy, and at its root, he or she is dealing with attachment trauma that usually is coming in from childhood. So so basically an alcoholic or drug addict will stay away from their substance in order to stay sober. Here, when we're dealing with sex addiction, abstinence is not really enough and is not really the answer. Obviously, they have to be sober from all the extracurricular things that they're doing, but having sexual intimacy with their partner is healthy and normal. So that being abstinent, having abstinence is not going to be the answer to this addiction. So the first thing I would highly recommend is that if you suspect that you have a sex addiction, that you would seek out a therapist who specializes in sex addiction. And if you are married or in a relationship with someone that you suspect has a sex addiction, you yourself need to get into individual therapy and suggest that your partner also enter into his or her own individual therapy. So this is going to be, so when someone is dealing with an addiction, it's a little bit more complicated than just going into couples counseling. Couples counseling will not be enough. You're all going to need individual therapy. So in treatment, basically the therapist will cover with you and investigate and look into your mindsets and your behaviors. And we would examine those things at a deeper level and make sure that they are now being lined up to more empowering belief systems, to more life affirming behaviors. As a therapist, I also work with my clients, no matter if they're dealing with the sex addiction or if they are the partner of the sex addict. We look at your inner child wounds as well, and we go into promoting healing of your childhood attachment traumas. Once you are working through the childhood wounds, dealing with your lifestyle choices and making sure that you're making life affirming lifestyle choices, you start to shift. And like I said to you earlier in our program, I spoke about Jean, my client, John, that, you know, within 6 months, he had repaired a great deal of his childhood traumas and was able to repair his relationship with his dad, who had been an abuser and had abused his mom and abused him and his siblings. So when that started to happen, my client was able to also put an end to the extramarital activities that are not life affirming or relationship affirming. And he was able to make amends with his partner. And today, my client is thriving in his relationship, and they're growing together as husband and wife. So some of the resources that I want to provide you, that if you are dealing with, you know, sex addiction, one of the things that I highly recommend is getting yourself a spiritual mentor. It's extremely important when you're dealing with an addiction to move beyond yourself and to embrace that there is a higher power, that there is a God, that there is the divine who is conspiring to provide you with everything that you need in your life, that cares about your life, and that everything is just working out together for your own good. And that no matter what has happened in your life, it all comes together and it gets weaved together to create a beautiful masterpiece of your life. So being able to surrender or will to a higher power is extremely important, because when we are entrapped in a vicious cycle of addiction, we live in self-deception. We live in the world of fantasy, and that world does have to shatter, and going through that shattering and that detox is not easy. So bringing and coming along with a spiritual mentor is extremely important. Using sex and love addiction or a 12-step group is extremely important as well, because then you will recognize that you're not alone, that there's so many other people dealing with this problem. If the situation is out of control, obviously then I highly recommend that you would check out some of the rehab centers that we have throughout this country. We have so many of them. And I also recommend resources for you to read from Patrick Carnes and Stephanie Carnes, and there's many others, but you can start with them because Patrick Carnes is the pioneer who termed the term sex addiction and sex and love addiction. So you can start with his videos and his books. Okay, and I have one more area that I want to address, and it's, if I am in a relationship with a sex addict, what should I be considering? So that's a really great, important question. And the first thing you need to consider is your health. Your physical, mental, and emotional health comes first. That means you need to get tested for STDs, and your partner needs to get tested for STDs. And you should not be engaging sexually with your partner if you're not sure that your partner has stopped engaging sexually with all these other partners. Until then, you do not have sex with a sex addict. You cannot change someone who doesn't think they have a problem, who doesn't want help. You could only help yourself. So I would recommend that you would get yourself into individual counseling. Do not go into couples counseling until your partner decides that he is ready and willing to deal with his or her addiction. And this is where the only time I'm going to tell my clients that you're going to need to love yourself more. And it's when you're dealing with addicts and when you're dealing with a narcissist. You will need to love yourself more in those times, because otherwise in healthy partnerships, your partner prioritizes your love, loving you and your needs. And having a healthy partnership where sexual intimacy can thrive requires a commitment between the two partners of healing their inner child, of healing the wounds that have come in because of the betrayals. There's going to be a heck of a lot of trust issues and betrayals that come in when you're dealing with a partner who has a sex addiction. So all those things need to heal first, but eventually in time, all those things can come to pass and you can once again thrive in your relationship and start afresh and new. All right. So I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Passion Unlimited podcast. Please subscribe to this station if you haven't already done so. And you can subscribe to Passion Unlimited podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. You can hear me on Spotify, and on YouTube, you can find me under Fearless Love. And please feel free to follow me on the Facebook group, Passion Unlimited Podcast, or on Instagram under Jianny Adamo. And you can also, if you want to do a free 15-minute consultation with me, you can go to fearlesslove.net. That is my website. And you can just click on the free 15-minute consultation. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you guys or connect with you guys next week.